Even better that it is a small group because that really allows for more interaction. And as a coach, my default setting is not to be prescriptive, but rather to help you find your way. And I think it goes without saying these are uncertain times. In fact, that may be the understatement of the day. I don't believe any of us has ever been where we find ourselves right now. I know I haven't. And the question isn't so much about how did we get here, because I think we have a little bit of an idea around that. But I think the more important question is, where do we go from here? And how will you and I navigate the new terrain that's being laid out? So you may find yourself like me, joining with the psalmist in what we would call prayers of lament for ourselves, for our colleagues, for our children, first responders, essential employees, people unable to visit loved ones in care facilities, the unemployed, single parents, homeless. I'm not sure there's anybody that stands outside of our concern. And while lament is a part of our faith heritage during times of what I call exile, catastrophe, and wandering in the wilderness, there's also a prophetic word of hope that God speaks. And I want to look with you at two passages and how they may in fact be speaking to us in the situation in which we find ourselves. The first is from the 4th chapter of Esther, the 14th verse. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but for you and for your father's, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for a time such as this. So I want you to just step back, take a deep breath, and hear this phrase. Who knows but that you have come to your position for such a time as this? What if, as God spoke to Esther through Mordecai, God was directing me to say those words to you? What if you heard God say, if you remain silent, relief and deliverance will arise from another place? So here's where I'd like you to interact with me. How do those two phrases speak to you? That you have been called to your position in a time such as this. And that if you remain silent, then God is going to have to look elsewhere for relief and deliverance to come to the people that you serve. So unmute yourselves and join in.
Well, Charlie, I'll start. You know, this whole part about remaining silent, for me, in my position, I sometimes feel like, you know, there's so much information churning right now, and things change not only daily, but by the hour. And so I spend a lot of time, you know, trying to make sure that the information that I'm disseminating is the correct information, is correct in the present time. So sometimes I feel like I go a length of time in that silence because I'm not sure about the information that I want to disseminate to people. And then there's that second side of it, which is I don't want the directors and the principals and the pastors to feel like that silence is uncaring, but to know that it is very thoughtful and trying to get the right information out.
Yeah, I appreciate your sharing that. It's always the conundrum of the period we call active waiting, when you're not quite sure what to do or what to say. And that, for me, that's always a time of information gathering, sorting, discerning the spirit. And I think you're really wise. You don't want to put information out until you know it's correct. But in this time, whatever we say today, we may find tomorrow we have to come back and say, that was true yesterday, but there's been new information. And now here's where we are. And so the lines are shifting. But there is wisdom in waiting. And yet there's also, you have to find where is that time and when is the time for you to put the information out or to take the next step. Good response, thank you. Who else wants to add to that?
I'll jump in. I really try and, like Corey, read everything and, what would be useful for me, what would be useful for my school, but also what would be useful for the church. And one of the things I did just this week is we got that through the ELEA email about the 24 questions every church should ask. And I passed that on to where my school is a church with 2 pastors, and I passed it on to them and the music director, the youth director, the office manager, the property manager, and we all meet in a Zoom meeting. And this morning I was very pleased to say our head pastor, senior pastor, said that he had not gotten anything like that through the ELCA, and it was so informative and thought-provoking that we are going to spend our next few Zoom meetings going through those 24 questions. And so today, our Zoom meetings is only an hour as a check-in for us. And so today we only got through 4, but it just made me feel really good that never, some of the questions they had thought about, but some of them, the church this church hadn't thought about how they would deal with that. And so I just thought, because I'm connected and I was the one that joined the ELEA and, am very open about listening to all of our emails and trying to attend as many of our Zoom meetings as whatnot. And the same with the PPP grant. I knew more about it than our pastor, who really had to apply for it. And, he wasn't getting the same answers from our accounting company and whatnot as I was, getting from you. So I just thought that I was here for a reason, not only for my preschool, but to help the church.
That's a great story. Thank you for sharing that. Who else wants to jump in?
I value what you had to say, Corey, too, is in terms of being thoughtful and careful about what you say. And I've also found myself in that position with the parents of the preschool that I serve and with staff members. But another challenge that I also am experiencing is wanting to find the balance between being hopeful and being realistic. And so that, being very careful. I want our parents of the children that we serve to know that there is hope. But what is that hope, right? And trying to be realistic too. That's one of the challenges I've been facing as well. And Patsy, I've also had an opportunity, things have come across my email and my desk from the ELEA, and a lot of that's from you, Corey, thank you. But I've also been able to pass on to our pastors that they didn't have any access to as well. So thank you for that.
Yeah, networking is critical. And, I applaud each of you as you share what you think is the relevant information for your context. And I would suggest this is a time for raising the questions, like with your parents. So what are your concerns? And as we think about opening, what would a safe environment look like for you and for your children? Because underneath everybody, we'll come back to this, are some unstated values and beliefs. And we have to somehow get those voiced so we know what we're dealing with. Anybody else want to add to this opening before I move on to the second passage? I appreciate both comments. I think they're very helpful and really talk about the important role that each of us plays, even though we may not think it's all that important. And also the value of networking, of information. That's one of the great things you're doing right now through this Zoom meeting. So here's the other hopeful passage as you're looking for hope. In Isaiah 43, verse 19, the prophet says, or God speaks to the prophet saying, "See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland." Now, if you understand the context, this word came through the prophet Isaiah to a people living in exile, which is what we're living in right now. They were in Babylon for 50 years. We've been in our homes for maybe 6 weeks, who experienced the loss of their beloved city, Jerusalem, and the leveling of their temple. Well, we've seen the leveling of life and jobs and a lot of other things through the virus. And so what do you do during captivity? Well, you settle in and you find a new way of being and you can grow comfortable. And now God calls them to leave the comfort of their exile, travel hundreds and thousands of miles across the desert and wasteland to what's going to be a devastated homeland and rebuild. And part of the underlying message is this is the God we find in Genesis 1 who creates out of chaos, who creates out of exile and loss. It's all a part of our Easter faith of death and resurrection. First comes the suffering and the loss and the death, and then comes new life. Now, if you're like me, when the prophet says, or God says to the prophet, "I'm doing a new thing, do you not perceive it?" And I go, "Not so much right now. Could you be a little clearer, please?" But what it's done, it's helped me to look around in times like this to say, okay, where are new things emerging? And so with some of the pastors that I coach, they're talking about how churches are networking now that used to work in silos. They're talking about how they've always wanted to do online worship and now have been forced to do online worship and figure out how to do online ministry. And I would submit to you that that's part of the creativity where we find, where is God in all of this? And so one of the truths of life for me is that while it's true, we can never go back to the way things were, we can always go forward and partner with God to help shape the way things can be and will be. And that life is always changing and transforming us. Because you're a part of this Zoom, you will be different at the end than you were at the beginning. And my question for you at the end, so what has changed by virtue of your participation today? And I would suggest to you that God's inviting you and me and everyone to partner with God in co-creating and using this as an opportunity to get back to, so what are the values that define our community? What does it mean to be together? And for many of us, what does it mean to be church? Or for you, to be a school, to be educators, to be responsible for people. And so as a coach, the things that begin to come to me, and we'll move more into these in a minute, So what is the vision that God is giving you for living in this time of physical distancing and online learning? What vision is God giving you as we will begin either in May or June or July or sometime to re-engage socially? We don't know the timeline, but we know now's the time to ask the questions as Laurie and Patsy have already talked about. What's the vision that God's giving you for how things will be when we're back to a new normal? Because you had safety protocols prior to now about how to keep your students safe. Those protocols are going to have to be changed because now you have other concerns that are very important. And so what I'd like for us to take a minute and talk about is, so what are you learning and what has the pandemic taught you? What's it teaching you? What are you discovering? And again, unmute, chime in. I like to hear from everybody. Everybody's learning something. I'm learning I don't like to be isolated.
For me, I'm still open and I am a planner. I've got to know what I'm doing, when I'm doing it, and that's all out the window. I can write a policy and the next day it needs to be changed because the Center for Disease Control or the Minnesota Department of Health or DHS or whoever decides to change it up on us. So I have learned to take things as they come, to take things day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute, and let go of that everything has to be planned ahead of time concept and just go with whatever is thrown at me. And that's been really, really difficult for me. The other thing that I've had to learn is that I was chosen to do this. That was very hard for me, and Patsy helped me with that a lot. I was on my way to work one morning and I was in tears. It was not fair to me. All the other church staff has been staying home for a month. They're not putting themselves in danger. I am out in this every single day. Why am I the one that has to go to work? And Patsy's like, Chris, think about this. You are the one chosen to do this. You are the one strong enough to do that. And virtually from that day forward, I was like, yes, this is what I was called to do. We needed to stay open. Of the 35 kids we have, 31 of them are tier 1 essential children. It's not a question. And before that, I had been going back and forth in my mind. Why did I stay open? There was only one girl that wasn't going to get unemployment or that didn't have unemployment, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden, like all fell in place. I was chosen to do this. I am now an expert in pandemics and staying open, and not necessarily a title that I want, but that's what I was chosen for. Like Corey will tell you, I'm extremely outspoken. I'm always the first one to pipe in, and this is what I was called to do. And I just need to accept that. And that has helped me a lot too, is the acceptance of this is my role now.
Great, and thank you for sharing that. You have a wealth of knowledge and experience that is vital to other people in your field. What else are other people learning? I need to hear from about 10 other people.
Well, I can go.
Okay.
I guess I am hopeful that we are learning the value of childcare in our society. I am a half-day preschool, so we are closed, but the full-time programs are the ones that are opened. Many of them, not all, but I feel like our old normal that children were not looked at, maybe or the way we cared for them was more about just keeping them safe while parents were at work.
Mm-hmm.
And
A placeholder.
In general, I think there were sort of some assumptions about that. I still had to justify to my own mom that I don't do glorified babysitting. So I think with parents at home with their children and just seeing the programs that are open, that are providing care to the first responders and essential personnel. I'm hoping this really helps start a national dialogue on the value of childhood and the value of children and families that maybe we had moved away from.
That's great. It certainly creates an opportunity. Thank you for sharing that. You're absolutely right.
I can go next. I have learned advocacy in a hurry. I'd not spent really any time or much time thinking about it, but not only have I been able to jump on to do what others have put together, where it's push a button, add your email address, send this form letter out, but also sharing my own story. I had the opportunity to be interviewed for Minnesota Public Radio, but kind of at the very beginning of our closure period, and now have made that connection with that reporter who's doing kind of the early childhood beat right now, and been able to continue conversations with her to make sure that the issues that are affecting me and my cohort right now are things that she's thinking about writing stories on, and just leaning into my support network and recognizing who those people are. Like, I know Chris and Patsy have each other, and recognizing who is in my same position, who can give me the guidance and support, and hey, we're all in this together. We're all in this together, but our this is very different from person to person. So
Exactly.
it's been just incredible to have my network of people, and sharing of information has been phenomenal. Nobody, if somebody's writing a reopening guide, they just don't think twice about sending it out to everybody to say, here you go, use this, don't recreate the wheel. We've already done a lot of research on this. So that's been incredibly powerful learning experience for me right now.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. Yep, new networking, new ways of support, new connections, all very valuable. Still have a few remaining. Come on, you shy people. All right, so not hearing from anybody. What new norms are beginning to surface as you think about your next step? And I think, Heather, you began to speak to that. What are some of the new norms that you are beginning to see as being essential for your opening up and re-engaging?
Charlie, I'll just share a little anecdote. So when I was a director of a school, I went through the ECHRS training. So it's an environmental rating scale training. And I went with a group of school leaders. We were doing research for the 4K program implementation in Verona, Wisconsin. And so we just were sitting back and we were onlookers while this was going on, and we had our books and we were, kind of taking a look at the different standards that were happening and the different protocols that were being put in place inside the classroom. And I remember that one of the things that we needed to do was record the number of times a child washed their hands. And at the time, I remember sitting in that program going, oh my gosh, like how does anybody get a kid to wash their hands this many times? Like you're completely taken away from the classroom environment and the play if they're going to reach the highest standard of hand washing in this classroom. And now I reflect on that and go, and this is what we're going to have to be doing in our centers plus. And that will be a new norm, just the level of hygiene that we expect of young children in classrooms. I'm not implementing it on a daily basis, though I probably should for my own children. So, you know, these other school leaders can talk more about what that implementation looks like, but it is interesting to reflect on when I thought, you know, gosh, this is crazy, a crazy number of times to have a child wash their hands.
Well, and can you imagine having a preschool child hold their hands under the faucet and scrub them for 20 seconds singing happy birthday to you, and what that's going to do? It's a new protocol. Make it fun, but it's an essential change. Yeah.
Yeah.
What other norms are you experiencing, are in transition, or being called into question?
So one of the new norms for us is going to be distancing, of course, because we just got reaccredited by NACCE. We just passed our reaccreditation the week before we closed. And so that was joyful and bittersweet at the same time. So we're very familiar with hand washing for 20 seconds. So those, then turning off the faucet with a paper towel and all those crazy things that young children are expected to do. So we are really coming to terms with what we are already really good at and what we are not really good at, and what we're going to need to consider and look at in a very different way, especially distancing. So as I work with my staff now in preparation for the possibility of reopening, what creative ideas do we have for making that happen? So I think that I happen to be very blessed to work with amazing people who are very, very creative and good at what they do. So together we put our heads together and we can come up with some amazing ideas and possibilities for the future. And one of the things that we're really going to need to do as a staff is be very flexible in a way that we have not had to be flexible before. So as early childhood educators, we're always flexible, right? Because we never know from moment to moment what's going on or how things might change very quickly. But this is a whole new level of flexibility we're being called to. So those are some of the things we're looking at.
What are some of the new ways you anticipate having to be flexible?
In terms of maybe how we open up in the beginning is not the way it might stay. So I know recommendations from the CDC are changing, and Chris is probably way more familiar with this than I am. But I think that we're going to have to be very aware of what works 1 week, 1 month may not work the next week, the next month. We may need to be really prepared to make changes as needed in short notice.
Great. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, what I also heard is the need to review all policy, practices, and procedures in light of what this virus has taught us. Yeah, good. Anybody else discovering anything about norms that are changing? I think, Laura, you did a really good job of giving us a good overview on that.
You know, one thing that comes across to my mind is, are we now going to have parents that ask that question before they enroll? If we come up with another pandemic, are you going to be an open center or a closed center? Or, you know, wanting to know our reaction to that type of thing. And is that gonna, it concerns me, will that affect my enrollment?
That's a great
Has anybody else thought of that?
I think two questions you face going into the fall, if we're actually coming back in the fall. What if the pandemic does go away, what if it resurfaces in the fall? Or what happens when influenza comes and there's confusion over whether it's influenza or COVID? Mm-hmm. How will you operate as a school in those conditions? And I think thinking and anticipating the question puts you way ahead of the curve, because it's going to come up.
think it'll be very important going forward to have a pandemic policy. I think this was all new uncharted territory, and the questions of opening or closing or how you will handle all the situations, I think, I know for me, that's going to be very important that it's all in writing ahead of time. And again, you're going to have to be flexible because it obviously isn't going to follow any, everything is so fluid. Yeah, everything is so fluid at any given point. And like Lori, when you were talking about it may change from week to week, for me, it's changed from day to day.
Okay.
I'll have a Monday night, 7 o'clock here in Minnesota. We have had this Monday night, 7 o'clock meeting that was Center for Disease Control or Minnesota Department of Health or whatever, got a policy written. And then the next day, the Center for Disease Control comes out for something else. It's like a constant battle that you're just kind of on this little seesaw and it goes up and down constantly. But I think at least having a plan in place ahead of time, if you're going to, like you were talking about, Patsy, like parents are going to want to know, are they going to get charged for it if you close? You know, always like a big question. At least now you'll have a protocol to go by as to what your policy will be.
Yeah. Will you open? If you open, how many students will you allow back? What kind of size will your classes be? Will they be the same size? Will they be different? What happens if a child becomes sick? What if the pandemic comes back? You know, these are all the unarticulated questions. And you know, if you can find a way to engage your families, if you're in preschool or schools, what are their underlying concerns? What would be helpful for them to know? Because then that gives you a chance to start digging. And you know what I'm hearing Chris say, so here's my plan until the CDC or somebody comes up with a different protocol. And that's all you can do because everybody's just learning on the fly. So how many of you are familiar with adaptive leadership? Are you familiar with that term? That's been the new going thing with Canoeing the Mountains, which is a great book. So adaptive leadership is literally leadership for a time such as this. And in the book, Canoeing the Mountains, they talk about two things to keep in mind. One is technical leadership. And I would suggest to you, technical leadership is where you were. And that's about managing budgets, personnel, policies, programs. It's when and how you prove you are competent and trustworthy. People won't go off the map with you in adaptive leadership until they trust that you know what you're doing and that you're going to uphold the values that they have. And that's why I think it's also important to be able to say, what are the values of your schools and operate from those as much as you can. And the interesting thing with technical leadership, the metrics are typically numbers and dollars. It's about enrollment, attendance, dollars, and progress. But adaptive leadership is for times when the things we used to do no longer work. It's about innovation and creativity. Now, if any of you or all of you are parents or work with kids, you are adaptive leaders. Because what do you do when your strategy for disciplining or teaching your child doesn't work? Do you keep doing the same thing? Or do you try something new? And my bet is, because you're shy and not going to tell me, my bet is you don't keep doing the same behavior modification over and over and over again. That's insanity. And so you keep trying something new. You don't know if it's going to work until you try it. And if it works, you give yourself a big pat on the back. And if it doesn't, you go, so what else can we do? This is what Edison did when working on the light bulb. You know, they said, didn't you get discouraged with all the times it failed? He goes, no, they simply taught me what didn't work. And so adaptive leadership keeps, its metrics are how many things are you trying? What are you trying? What's the new innovation and creativity? So Laura, you're lucky that you have an adaptive and creative staff, and anybody that has that is very fortunate, because that's exactly what you need in a time like this. So what I want to ask you now are a series of coaching questions, and I would love to be able just, again, to help you move through some of this. And the first question is, and it's really for you to answer, but you can share this, with all of us. So what is your context and situation? Where are you now? The second question that would come in a coaching conversation, where do you want to be? And you're all going to say, wow, we want to be back fully engaged, fully enrolled. Okay, that's the ultimate goal. But you can't get there in one step. So what's the first step that you can take that will begin to move you in that direction? That's a step of hope and positive movement. Coaching is all about going forward. And it begins by asking, so tell me, what's working for you? Tell me what isn't working. And then I would likely ask the question I asked earlier. So what are you discovering in these pandemic days that will be an asset for you in moving forward? And how can you leverage that to your advantage? Because you've learned something that's going to be critical to your institution or ministry from this, whether it's about how better to connect, how to better provide safety, how to do education in multiple settings. You've come to know more about your limits, and there's also some new opportunities. So part of the question is, I don't think it's going to be an either or world. I think it's going to be a both and. What does that look like for you? I don't have a clue, but you do. So it's a matter of how do you coach that out of yourself? How do I get from where we are shut down or limited to back fully engaged? And you're limited in fully engagement until A, permission is given to do that, and B, people have confidence that it's safe. So part of the issue for you is, how do you create a safe environment for yourself and your people that will elicit their re-engagement? And so the other question that lies under that is, so what needs to change? And then I would ask you, so what's the risk of changing and the risk of not changing? Because it cuts both ways. And then what resources do you need in order to bring about the change? And then finally, for I think it was Chris, who's the planner, what's your plan? What is your next step? Realizing that if you're going to get from here to here, you're going to have to take it one little step at a time. And that's how we get across the space. And so you may not know all the answers, and that's why it's adaptive. It's not a linear path. It moves all over the place. If you look at the text in Exodus when they were in the wilderness, here's a trick question. How long did it take them to get from Egypt to the promised land? Somebody's got to give me the answer that's stock. How long? It took 2 years. Well, what happened? They got to the promised land and they sent in the spies. Do you remember? They sent in 12 spies, scope out the land. And they came back and they go, wow, it's full of milk and honey and great stuff, but there are giants in the land with fortresses. And we can't go in there, we'll get annihilated. And you go, really? After God got you out of Egypt and through the wilderness and fed you and provided for you, you don't think God can provide for you there? And they go, huh. And then it took them 38 more years of wandering. before God had a courageous generation ready to move into the promised land. So how do we create that courageous response that's willing to re-engage and move forward without having to wander longer than we need to? There is a time of transition. Transition is the time, we go back to what Corey said, of maybe being quiet, thinking, planning, gathering data, getting ourselves ready. But then there's the time to say, let's go, let's do this. And they did that with Joshua. And they still had the fortified cities and the giants in the land. And it wasn't an easy journey, but they got there. And we'll get there. As many of you have already said, we'll get there together. That's the power of community. We'll get there together. So the one thing you can go to the bank on, people are always going to need to educate their children. People are going to always want to learn and grow. The question is, how will they satisfy the need? Where will they turn? To whom will they turn? And how will you, in your place, provide the safe environments for that to happen? What resources do you need, and how can you find them? You are indeed called for a time such as this. And if you look beneath the surface and keep scratching them, my guess is you'll only see it in hindsight, where God is doing the new thing that's emerging, and you and I can't see it because it's emerging right in front of us. And I can never see things. My hindsight's 20/20. My foresight's not quite as good. So I'm open for questions. How can I be of help to you in where you are in moving forward? My sense is you're already a great help to each other, and kudos to you for that.
I really appreciate some of these questions to help us think deeper about what actions we need to take next. Sometimes we're so busy looking at the big picture and opening our doors, or we forget to dial it down to these incremental steps that we need to take just to get to that big picture. So, I'm thinking about reopening next month, and one of my little steps was to call one of our suppliers to see if they were going to have the supplies that we would need. And do I need to order them now to arrive in a month, or can they turn them around in a day like they typically do for us? So breaking it down and recognizing we don't have to do this one leap at a time. One small step is all that we need to do. It's a lot less overwhelming if we think about just what's coming next rather than trying to plan for, but what is our fall going to look like? I think some of us just need to back up and look at it like, what is tomorrow going to look like? What's going to happen on Monday? And that kind of thing. So thank you.
Yeah, Heather, that's just terrific. That's great insights on your part. And I'd say keep doing what you're doing, and you'll get there. There is some wisdom in the Bible saying, let today's own problems be sufficient for today, because it can be overwhelming. And if you ever work with people who are depressed, you ask them, what one thing can you do today that you can celebrate that you accomplish? And that will keep you hopeful, because that moves you forward in a good direction. So thanks for sharing that. That was great.
I'll just interject with one other quick thing is every time I meet with my staff, we're meeting just like this via Zoom. I'm taking the moment to ask them all what they're thankful for today. Even if it's just their friends and family, if we start making gratitude a regular practice for us, we'll be so much more thankful for what we see and have every day. So I'm really trying to make that a habit for when we get together to talk about what good things are happening, rather than always looking back to what challenges we're having. I want to get to those too, but let's start out on a good note.
That's great. I've just finished reading 2 books on habits, and the one that I've chosen to try is when I first get up. They suggested as soon as your feet hit the floor. I can't do that, but I do it when I'm lifting my coffee mug, is be able to say to myself, today's going to be a great day. And it's amazing how that changes your perspective. So you're absolutely right. What are our blessings? What are we grateful for? Amen.
I think a lot of us too in this time have to think a lot like doctors and nurses do, and other healthcare staff. This whole idea of compartmentalizing what you're doing right now, because not only are we worried about caring for our pastor who is trying to care for our congregation, caring for our families, caring for our staff, caring for our own home families too. But that as we work through some of these things, we have to put some of those people in their compartments so we can just focus on the here and now. So if today I need to work with my staff, then I'm going to put my pastor in a compartment. I'm going to put my family in a compartment, and I'm going to just focus myself on this, because I know for me, oftentimes it's that, that worry. My brain likes to throw all kinds of crazy stories at me about, the what ifs, and what if I'm doing this and something happens to this person, or what if, taking this step affects this person in an adverse way, but having to really just focus on that kind of one group at a time.
Yes, we're all having to find new ways to manage from home. And it really is stressful on moms in particular, who usually end up homeschooling if you have kids. And we haven't figured out how to take breaks from our Zoom meetings. We go from one Zoom to another, and I'm telling you, that's a recipe for burnout. And I'm finding with the people that I coach, they're really struggling with finding balance and self-care.
I put it on my calendar. I was having a hard time focusing on what I should do, so I started writing out a daily list of every hour, kind of like when you go to the hair salon, every hour there's an appointment, and I'll set myself tasks for every hour or hour and a half, and recognizing I don't have to check my email all the time. Every time a new one comes in, just setting myself, every couple of hours a time to do that. And sometimes I'll write in like lunch and self-care. So I take myself away from my setting and just go do stuff for me for a half an hour or an hour or however long I need to do it today. And remembering that I don't have to be chained to this all day to prove that I'm doing what I'm getting paid for.
It's great. What are others finding helpful as you make your way through this?
I think self-care is definitely important for me as well, for all of us. I'm helping to take care of my grandson, and when he's with me, when we're with children, we're present fully with that child, right? So we go on bike rides and do other things, which helps me to leave behind some of the worries and concerns that I have. But also just giving myself permission not to have all the right answers all the time. So I'm looked at by everyone, what are we going to do? What's the plan? What are the next steps? And it's just helps me to navigate this, just to take myself off the hook a little bit, and to recognize for my own well-being that I don't have to always have the answers and always know exactly what to do next. I love the idea of the small steps. And also, Charlie, when you as you laid out those points, it just kind of reminded me that there's a lot of this I'm already doing, And I didn't realize that or didn't know that. So that's really reassuring to me also.
Good, good. Yeah. The fun thing I love about coaching is I don't need to know anything because I'm not trying to figure out what to tell anybody to do. What I'm trying to figure out is how to ask the best question to help them figure out what their next step is. So that may be helpful to you too, as you go about. I really appreciate, Laurie, what you're doing to maintain your own balance and coming to the realization you don't have to have all the answers.
Thank you for providing this today as well.
Yeah. What else can I be of help to before we let Corey wind this up?
Well, Charlie, I think you've given us a lot to think about and, you know, be able to sit with for a while. These are, I know very well that these are tough questions to sit with sometimes, and the answer does not come easily. So, you know, I think a lot of us will go forth and be able to reflect on the conversations that have been had today and the suggestions and information that others have shared with us. So I really appreciate you bringing this to us today, to this group. And I'm wondering if you would be willing to close us in prayer.
Sure. Let us pray together. Good and gracious God, help us to remember that you are in the midst of all that we are experiencing. You are a God who enters into our suffering, our pain, our panic. A God who breathes new life into us. A God who helps us to find our way in the wildernesses of life. A God who is always creating something new and good out of the chaos that we experience. Thank you for calling each of us to be leaders in a time such as this. Thank you for the gifts that each brings to their respective places of work and ministry. Thank you for the networking that's going on, the values that are being affirmed, the safe places that are being created. Give to each of us a sure sense of your presence and love, and to trust the Spirit's guidance as we continue to journey through this time to a time when we are restored and re-engaged. We ask this in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you again, Charlie, and thank you to all of you who were able to attend today. This is recorded, so we will put it up on the website later today.
Thank you, Corey.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank all of you.
Thanks, Shirley.
Bye, everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you.
You too.